guys, and welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome. This is actually the first video or podcast, I suppose, if you're listening over there, of a whole month of LGBTQ+ content here on my channel or podcast. This is something I've been wanting to do for a really long time. Each year when June, Pride Month comes around, I've been itching to do this, but I'd never actually come out on the internet and it scared me. But here I am, officially queer on the internet, and ready to spread the word of some LGBTQ+ mysteries and histories, and hopefully raise some awareness of some issues the community currently face, and maybe even raise some money. I need to figure it out, but I know you can attach fundraisers to certain videos, so keep an eye out for that later in the month, and hopefully we can give back. LGBTQ+ issues are something I feel incredibly strong about for obvious reasons. Queer history is something that I spent a lot of time educating both myself on and pretty much anyone who will listen to me. Sitting here right now as a queer person, living in my home with my girlfriend, being able to go out here in the UK and hold hands and kiss with only minimal concern and facing only the occasional backlash, I know I have so many people in history to thank, people who fought for me and so many others like me in my community in the decades before we even existed. The revolutionaries who fought for change and acceptance. And one of the main people I wish I could have thanked is Marsha P. Johnson. This video is going to be about the mysterious death of Marsha, but I feel like I would be doing her a disservice if I didn't share her incredible life with you also. So this is a history and mystery story here, all in one. If you've ever looked into even the smallest bit of queer history, then you will probably have come across the name Marsha P. Johnson. She was a central figure at Stonewall and one of the main faces of the gay liberation movement in New York City. She was born and assigned male on the 24th of August 1954 in New Jersey, where she eventually graduated from Thomas A. Edison High School in 1963. I will be using she, her pronouns to refer to Marsha throughout this video, just because that's what it seems that most people refer to her as in life. After graduation, Marsha enrolled in the United States Navy for a moment before realising that just wasn't the life for her. That very same year, she arrived in New York City with nothing but one bag of clothes and $15 to her name, settling in the diverse Greenwich Village, which is where she would remain for the next few decades up until her death. She became a really well-known face in the area. She was a transient and worked as a sex worker, as so many girls like her had to do to survive. Marsha said that she stopped counting after the 100th time she was arrested. She found community in Greenwich Village, forming her chosen family with many others just like her. And it seems she was actually in a luckier position than many others in Greenwich Village, who had been forced out of their homes by their families due to their identity or sexuality. At this time in history, not only was homosexuality considered a mental illness, it was actually illegal. And although Marsha left home, she did remain in contact with her family. I don't think their relationship was the best, but they were in contact and she would often return home for the holidays. But there were so many queer people in New York City who couldn't do that, and Marsha became family and mother for so many, even inviting people home with her to New Jersey to enjoy hot meals with her and her family. Marsha P. Johnson was a Greenwich Village staple, especially in the nightlife. It was known that she would give you the shirt off of her back if you needed it, or even if you just told her you liked it, she'd take it off and give it to you. She was very well known for her elaborate fashion sense, and she never ever dressed to blend in. She wore what she wanted, when she wanted, and she never apologised for it, fashioning garments out of whatever she could get her hands on, and she was always known for these big flower crowns that she would wear. Discussion around Marsha's identity is something which can cause arguments online, but it's important to note that Marsha lived in a time where she didn't have the terminology to explain her gender that we do now. According to an article in The Guardian, the term transgender wasn't even coined until 1971, although other sources do quote 1969. But even then, the word wouldn't come into mainstream use for a number of decades. Had the word transgender existed, might Marsha have used it? We don't know. We do know she self-identified as a drag queen, gay, occasionally a transvestite, which is a word I'm only going to use for the purpose of this video, and the majority of people who knew her in life used she, her pronouns when talking about her. Some academics today say that she could simply be best described as gender non-conforming. What we do know is that Marsha said that the P in Marsha P. Johnson stood for pay it no mind, her usual retort when somebody asked her about her gender. Marsha, pay it no mind, Johnson. I found a fantastic quote in an article called Overlooked by Sewell Chan, which was written for the New York Times. The quote was from Susan Stryker, who's an associate professor of gender and women's studies at the University of Arizona, and she wrote, Marsha P. Johnson could be perceived as the most marginalised of people, black, queer, gender non-conforming, poor. You might expect a person in such a position to be fragile, brutalised, beaten down. Instead, Marsha had this joie de vivre, the capacity to find joy in a world of suffering. She channeled it into political action and did it with a kind of fierceness, grace and whimsy, with a loopy, absurdist reaction to it all. For this video, I've used a variety of sources and articles, all of which will be linked down below, including Overlooked. But I do want to give a special mention to a documentary on Netflix entitled The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson, directed by David France. It chronicles the lives and battles of both Marsha P. Johnson and her good friend Sylvia Rivera, who you will also be learning about shortly. But it centres on the investigation into Marsha's mysterious 1992 death. I thought it was a very well made documentary, and it is pretty much the only source I could find which gave details about Marsha's death and the subsequent investigation, or lack thereof I should say. If you're able to, please go and watch it. It brought me to tears more than once. If you know the name Marsha P. Johnson, you probably know it due to her involvement in the Stonewall Uprising, which began on the 28th of June 1969. I do have a full video about Stonewall if you want to hear a really in-depth telling, but for the sake of this video, the Stonewall riots, or sometimes called the Stonewall Uprising, happened in a time when gay people were regularly threatened and beaten by the police. The Stonewall Inn was, or I should say is, a bar on Christopher Street in New York City. And Stonewall was a gay bar in a time when gay people weren't even allowed to be served alcohol, let alone have entire bars dedicated to them. Same-sex dancing in public was prohibited, as well as any form of cross-dressing. You could be arrested for anything that suggested you were not straight. At this time in New York, most gay bars were actually run by the mafia, who would bribe the police to pre-warn them of any raids that might be happening. On the 28th of June, this warning to Stonewall didn't come. In the early hours of the morning, police raided the Stonewall Inn and dragged the occupants out. About 200 people, gay men, lesbians, transgender people, drag queens, were thrown out onto Christopher Street and the police arrested who they could. It's thought about 13 people were arrested that night. But after decades of persecution, the LGBTQ+ community of Greenwich Village decided that they were not going to be treated like this any longer. Something snapped. If you've seen some of the recent calls to stop police from attending Pride events, this could shed some light for you as to why this is. Stonewall and the subsequent light shed on the gay liberation movement, all the rights we have today in certain Western countries, stemmed from the LGBTQ+ community fighting back against the police who had persecuted them for decades, centuries even. Having police at Pride is a very large conversation to be had, and this isn't the time for it, but it's a thought to mull on. That night in June, instead of accepting their treatment, the people at Stonewall fought back, and instead of dispersing as it usually would do, the crowd grew. Soon, thousands of people were fighting back on Christopher Street against the police. It's said to have been a butch lesbian woman, Stormy Delivery, who started this fight back, as she was arrested and shouted for people to do something, anything. So they did. A lot of people mistakenly think that then 23-year-old Marsha is the one who threw the first brick at Stonewall, but she wasn't. In fact, Marsha arrived at Stonewall after everything had already started, later saying, "When I got downtown, the place was already on fire." But what Marsha did do was become a leader in the revolution after the fact. Many tell a story of how on the second night of the uprising, she climbed a lamppost and dropped a bag with a brick in it onto a police car, shattering the window. Everything that Marsha did before and after Stonewall had this political intent behind it. She was said to be a ray of sunshine, but she knew what she was doing and she knew that she was going to make a difference. The Gay Liberation Front was formed in the aftermath of Stonewall, and Marsha joined as part of the Drag Queen Caucus. On the first anniversary of Stonewall, she marched in the first ever Gay Pride Parade, which was then called the Christopher Street Liberation Day. She protested against anti-LGBT treatment anywhere in the city, and with her close friend Sylvia Rivera, she co-founded STAR, the Sweet Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, although now I think it's the Sweet Transgender Action Revolutionaries. Sylvia Rivera was a Latina drag queen and activist who Marsha took under her wing in 1963, and Sylvia credits Marsha with saving her life. Together, the two of them would change the world. The gay rights movement stands on the shoulders of lesbian women and drag queens, specifically drag queens of colour. But then in 1973, drag queens were actually banned from participating in the Gay Pride Parade because organisers said that drag queens were giving them a bad name. So what did Marsha and Sylvia do? They marched right on up ahead at the front of the parade, standing in defiance. Star House, a house that they paid the rent with the money they'd earned on the streets with their sex work, became a safe place, a haven for gay and trans street kids. Marsha and Sylvia became the mothers of so many children who had nowhere else to go, providing for them in any way they could. They got kids and teenagers off the street, and I'm sure saved the lives of so many of them just by giving them a roof over their heads. The majority of them would have been Black and Latino, having dealt with rejection from their biological families. But despite Star House, Marsha was, for the most part, homeless. In 1980, she stayed for a night with a friend of a friend, a gay activist called Randy Wicker, and she ended up never leaving. She stayed there with Randy for 12 years until her death. Over the coming years, she would become an AIDS activist, sitting with and caring for people who were dying from the disease, in a time when people would barely even touch them. She even cared for Randy's lover up until he died in 1990. She became a member of ACT UP, the AIDS advocacy organisation, and some sources say that she eventually did end up catching the disease herself, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But anyway, that's not how she died. On the morning of Monday, the 6th of July, 1992, Marsha's body was pulled out of the Hudson River at Christopher Street Pier. She was just 46 years old. Almost immediately, the police, the 6th Precinct, marked the death as suicide, despite people who knew her saying that there was no evidence to suggest that was the case. Despite some mental health problems, Marsha was never suicidal. Still to this day, there's yet to be a proper investigation into Marsha's death, but in December 2002, the ruling was changed from suicide to undetermined. Could it be that someone else was responsible for her death? 1992 was a very heavy year in New York for anti-LGBT crimes. The NYC Anti-Violence Project, which is the largest anti-LGBTQ+ violence organisation in the USA, received reports of 1,300 bias crimes, 18% of which were police violence. So in 1992, you couldn't exactly trust the police to look after you, particularly if you were a minority. Not that it's too much better now. It's not crazy to think that the police would have immediately written off Marsha's case without an investigation, even if they did think there could have been something there. She was a black, gay drag queen. They simply just did not care. Trans women were literally turning up dead in the streets on an almost daily basis in New York at this time, particularly black trans women. Marsha's death was not an unusual one, and it's not unusual the police refused to investigate it. But it says a lot that Marsha was one of the most well-known LGBT people of the time, especially in New York City. She was a revolutionary. Her name has become even more well-known in the years since her death. But if her case can't get solved, what chance is there for others? And this is not a problem that's going away. In fact, now violence against trans and non-gender conforming people, particularly trans women of colour, is worse than ever, and legislation in the USA is only taking away rights, not giving them. According to an article on diversityinc.com from April 19th this year, there are currently more than 127 different anti-transgender bills up for debate in state houses across the country. In 2020, 44 trans people were killed in the USA, which is the highest number since the Human Rights Campaign started tracking anti-trans violence. That's more than 3 trans people murdered every month across the USA. And it's found that black, trans and non-gender conforming people such as Marsha are disproportionately discriminated against. A study by the National LGBTQ Task Force showed that black trans people have a 26% unemployment rate. That's twice as high as the unemployment rate for transgender people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, and 4 times as high as the unemployment rate for the general population. 41% of black trans people have been homeless, 34% have household incomes of less than $10,000, and nearly half have attempted suicide. Black trans women are killed much more frequently than black trans men. Being trans in general will lead to discrimination, of course. According to transequality.org, 58% of transgender people who interact with law enforcement reported experience of harassment, abuse, or other mistreatment. Being transgender combined with systemic racism creates a very difficult life for black trans women, not even mentioning society's ingrained misogyny and overtly fragile masculinity. All in all, life as a trans woman in the USA today and many other countries is difficult and dangerous. This hasn't changed since Marsha's death in 1992. There were multiple sightings of Marsha in the couple of days before her body was found. Her roommate, Randy Wicker, last reported seeing her on the 2nd of July, the Thursday. The reports say that she went to see her family on Saturday, the 4th of July. She always went to see her family in New Jersey on holidays. A friend called Kitty Rotolo also recalled in the documentary how her and Marsha had plans together on the night of the 4th. They'd run into each other that day in broad daylight in front of the Christopher Street bookstore, Marsha in full drag as always. They made plans to meet at midnight to troll the streets, I assume to find John's, and then they were going to head to the Anvil, which is a legendary gay nightclub in New York, around 2 or 3 a.m. Except Marsha never showed up and Kitty never saw her again. Rumour has it that Marsha was seen getting into a car on the stroll in Greenwich Village after being warned by many people not to get into this particular car. There was also a report made to the Anti-Violence Project of someone else seeing her around 4 a.m. on 22nd Street, rushing towards the Hudson River. She seemed scared apparently and was being followed by 2 guys. The Anti-Violence Project did report this to the police at the time, but the police deny ever having any knowledge of this. The cold case detective now in charge of this case says that this doesn't change the fact there's still no credible evidence that Marsha was murdered. Her autopsy showed that the cause of Marsha's death was definitely drowning, so it's not like somebody killed her elsewhere and then just dumped her body in the water. She died without a doubt in the Hudson River and went in alive and breathing. Despite this, on the autopsy report, the words possible homicide are circled. Could it be that somebody pushed her into the water and then failed to help her out? Or the pier was dilapidated at the time, perhaps she was being chased and fell through and again they failed to help her. Both cases would still count as homicides. When Marsha's body was pulled from the water on the morning of the 6th of July, onlookers noted that it looked like she'd been violently assaulted due to a hole in the back of her head. But the autopsy noted that this injury happened after her death and may have been caused by floating debris in the water. In the weeks before her death, Marsha had started to get paranoid that the mafia were after her, and her worries weren't all that unsubstantiated. Her roommate and good friend, Randy Wicker, was a proud gay activist at this time, and he'd recently had a run-in with some mobsters. Or actually, maybe run-in isn't quite the right word, he'd antagonised them. As I mentioned earlier in the video, at the time of Stonewall, most gay bars were run by the mafia, and it appears that in the 90s, they were still profiting off the LGBT community. At the end of the New York Pride Parade every year, the mafia ran a for-profit street fair which was called the Christopher Street Festival, and they were accused of pocketing the profits instead of giving back to the community as they said they were going to do. Randy Wicker was the forefront of the fight against them, despite being warned by others that they'd try to do the same thing and they'd just received threats that something bad was going to happen to them. Could it be that Marsha was the one who paid the price to teach Randy a lesson? The documentary suggests that he'd never considered this before, but the Anti-Violence Project actually received a tip not long after Marsha's death, which said that Randy needed to end his campaign against the festival and certain mobsters, otherwise what happened to Marsha Johnson will happen to him. Could this be suggesting that the mob was behind Marsha's death? Or was this simply someone using Randy's known close connection to Marsha to scare him? Apparently this message was never passed on to Randy, he didn't know about it. I do think it's possible that the mafia could be responsible for Marsha's death because, of course, much crazier things have happened in this world and you don't want to mess with the mafia. But is there any actual proof of this being the case? No. If it was them, they cover their backs well, and it's unlikely we'll ever get a solid answer to this. Mobsters generally don't speak. Whilst the documentary alludes to Marsha always being happy, always having a smile on her face and loving life, never having suicidal ideations, it seems that other sources take a different stance on her general attitude. Apparently Marsha had a volatile personality and a temper, which had caused her to be banned from a number of gay bars across the city. I mean, this isn't all that surprising really, considering the difficult life she'd had. She was homeless, working on the streets, trying to navigate life as a non-conforming person in a time when everyone had to conform. Nobody can be a saint 100% of the time. Not everyone is happy and on 24/7, including Marsha. Sylvia Rivera said that the first time she met Marsha, she was in the midst of a street fight. Bartenders and shop workers down Christopher Street said that Marsha could be incredibly aggressive and, like I said, had been thrown in jail more times than she could count. Sometimes it was for her sex work, sometimes for her temper, and sometimes for other reasons. On more than one occasion when her temper flared, she ended up being hospitalised and sedated. But does all of this equal wanting to commit suicide? All of her friends disagree. They admit that Marsha had mental health problems, but she never showed she wanted to die. This just wasn't her. Randy Wicker, one of her best friends and roommate for 12 years, suggests that she may have hallucinated and walked into the river, or maybe even jumped into it to escape harassers, but he says she was in no way suicidal. Randy also says that he spoke to a witness who saw a man from the neighbourhood fighting with Marsha on the pier on July 4th. Apparently this man called Marsha a homophobic slur, and then later he overheard the same man at a bar bragging about killing a drag queen called Marsha. When this witness tried to tell the police what he knew, he was simply brushed off. They didn't want to know. Apparently, Marsha was regularly seen at this pier being harassed by bullies. Considering the things that Marsha did not only for her community in New York City, but also for the generations of queer people after her, she deserves better than for her death just be brushed off with no investigation. Perhaps it was a suicide, but even the pathologist noted a possible homicide on the autopsy report. But the police just weren't interested in an investigation into her case. Marsha's case sets a precedent. If law enforcement can't even be bothered to look at her case properly, then what chance does any other transgender person of colour have? I do think it's likely that somebody else was involved in her death, and I don't think the likelihood should just be brushed off because it might have been a suicide. She was only 46 years old at the time. Imagine the things she could have gone on to do with the rest of her life. She'd still be alive now. 2 decades after her death in 2012, the DA reopened her case, but it doesn't seem like it's gone any further than that. Her hard work is finally getting some of the recognition it deserves, in New York City at least. In 2019, it was announced that Marsha and Sylvia would be honoured with monuments in Greenwich Village near Stonewall. They were supposed to be completed by 2021, but I couldn't find any articles online to confirm if this was the case. So if you live in the area, perhaps you could let us know in the comments. In February 2020, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced that the East River State Park in Brooklyn was to be renamed in Marsha's honour, the first New York State Park named after an LGBT person. It is now the Marsha P. Johnson State Park. I do think Marsha, at the very least, deserves to have her death properly investigated. They might get to the end of a full investigation and turn around and say they still think it was suicide, but personally, I don't think there's any evidence to point towards it being suicide more than there's evidence of anything else. Maybe it was even accidental, but I do think there's so many things to point towards other people causing her problems on the night that she died. It's not insane to think that somebody could have been involved. I really do hope you've learned something today. Marsha P. Johnson was incredible. She was a trailblazer. She was a revolutionary. So much of what we have today can be put down to her hard work, along with the hard work of so many other people just like her. And I will forever be grateful for that. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I will see you next time. Bye guys.